Much like the war in Iran, the war in Ukraine has had its effects on the African economy at large. The war, which began in February 2022, brought with it an increase in fuel prices, bread prices, and fertilizer prices across Africa. Russia invaded Ukraine over a dispute involving NATO membership. For many Africans, the politics behind this conflict may feel distant and unfamiliar. Yet despite the distance, the consequences of this war have reached Africa. And nowhere is this more obvious than in the price of oil. Africa has a bizarre energy paradox. 20 African countries currently produce oil. Among them are Nigeria, Angola, Libya, Egypt, and Algeria. Despite pumping millions of barrels of oil every day, the continent still spends billions of dollars importing the petrol and diesel we need. And one thing is simple: we don't have enough refining capacity. The war in Ukraine exposed just how vulnerable the system is. Russia is one of the world's largest oil producers. In 2022, Russia produced roughly 11% of the world's oil, ranking behind the United States and Saudi Arabia. So when Russia invaded Ukraine and sanctions were imposed on Russian energy exports, global oil prices surged, and African countries that depend on imported fuel suddenly found themselves paying more for petrol and diesel. For the purposes of this demonstration, we selected 5 countries to look at, and what we see is interesting. Fuel prices fluctuated significantly after 2022, before stabilizing somewhat in 2024 and 2025, and then rising again amid the 2026 Middle East crisis. Nigeria initially tried to shield consumers through fuel subsidies, but when the government removed the subsidy in 2023, petrol prices surged. Landlocked countries like Zimbabwe have also remained particularly vulnerable because they depend on imported fuel transported through neighboring countries. But this raises a bigger question. Why is a continent that produces so much crude oil still so dependent on imported fuel? Part of the answer is our refining capacity. Take South Africa. The country once had around 718,000 barrels per day of refining capacity. By 2021, that had fallen to roughly 358,000 barrels per day, and then more capacity disappeared. Supref, South Africa's largest refinery, had a capacity of 180,000 barrels per day before it stopped operating in 2022. Engen's Durban refinery, with a capacity of 135,000 barrels per day, had also shut down. Other refineries have faced fires, floods, maintenance, and operational problems. So even though South Africa has an established petroleum industry, it has increasingly had to rely on imported refined fuel. And then there's Nigeria. Nigeria is one of Africa's biggest oil producers, yet for years it also depended heavily on imported petrol. The country has 4 state-owned refineries with a combined nameplate capacity of 445,000 barrels per day. Port Harcourt, 210,000, Warri, 125,000, Kaduna, 110,000. But for years, these refineries operated far below capacity or sat idle while undergoing rehabilitation. Then came Dangote. Dangote built a 650,000 barrel per day refinery in Lagos. To put that into perspective, its nameplate capacity is larger than the combined capacity of Nigeria's 4 state-owned refineries. It is just not Africa's largest refinery. It is the world's largest single-train refinery. Dangote is now looking to expand it to around 1.4 million barrels per day, and is taking the idea beyond Nigeria. Dangote is pursuing plans for a 700,000 barrel per day refinery in Lamu, Kenya, which could eventually supply Kenya and neighboring countries and reduce their dependence on imported fuel. But here's the important part. Building a refinery doesn't automatically solve Africa's energy problem. You need crude oil, you need infrastructure, you need reliable transportation, and you need to produce fuel cheaply enough for the ordinary people to afford it. The war in Ukraine exposed a weakness that already existed in Africa's energy system. We don't simply have an oil problem, we have a refining problem. And until Africa can turn its own crude into the fuel it consumes, every global crisis will continue to hit us where it hurts the most: at the pump.